Hello and welcome to Access Chat. I'm delighted we're joined today by Lindsey Spalding, who is the Director of Workforce Development at the National Centre for Simulation. And that's simulation, not stimulation. Although I think you're going to find that this conversation is stimulating. So welcome, Lindsay. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background and the work that you're doing? Because I'm sure what you're doing is going to be fascinating to our audience.
All right. Well, thank you. And good morning, afternoon, evening, I guess, depending on where you are in this world. I'm excited to join you. Deborah and I met, I guess, several months ago on another webinar panel. And so we got to know each other a little bit. So I'm coming from a workforce development background, specifically from the modeling, simulation, and training industry. But it was not a straight and narrow pathway from, school to there. So I am an untraditional student. I grew up all over the world, ended back in Florida. So I'm here located logistically in Central Florida in a research parkway that is really unique in the fact that we have probably the second smallest base, the Naval Air Warfare Training Systems Division, we affectionately call NOC, NOC TSD, which is a base that primarily creates simulations for training. Like I said, from satellites to submarines, human in the loop. So these systems are built and then shipped worldwide from our little research parkway in Central Florida. Now, the benefit to that is I actually am housed in a partnership building, and a partnership building in our research parkway means that I am in a building that is 50-50% shared with university, because we're very close to the University of Central Florida. So I'm not a University of Central Florida employee, but I share space, time, brain power with the academic researchers in the University of Central Florida. In addition to the academic researchers, we also share our building with military, and military from the perspective of Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force. So, an Air Force, is currently transitioning some of their employees to Space Force. So, it's a really empowering environment to teach and learn in. So, the National Center for Simulation is a nonprofit that was created back in the late 80s, really to help get the technology from the military entities out into the community for really economic development. Our role has changed a bit because I think industry is now outspending in the research and development and technology and innovation comparative to our Department of Defense friends. And so we are now helping to get some of the tech and innovation coming out of the communities into the hands of the Department of Defense in order to help workforce development. And so what I do from a director's position is I am very deep in STEM education, but we're really trying to break those silos, right? It's not a science, a technology, and an engineering, a math, and you throw an A in there for art, right? And you can't have that, any of the STEM without art. But we really try to break that down and take what we do from workforce development. So I run programs from early learners. We bring actually fifth grade students and their educators into our mixed reality learning environment and really help them from the lens of they might be a bioengineering one day, an aerospace engineer another day, a doctor, so we put the lens on, we put tools in their hands from live physical simulations of launching a rocket, which is super important, to also then what would it be like if we changed up scenarios within a virtual reality launch system, or how can we use AR or augmented reality to look at a new 3D model we've created to add an accessory to our rocket. And so our educators, unfortunately, don't get the opportunity to be out in the workforce and to see exactly what that workforce is. And then also the skills, right? Because educational systems and workforce systems have different ideas of skills, and where the students leaving their programs are ready to be. And so that is empowering to the educators to be able to come in and see, their students in serious play. I will say it in that because we are playing, but we have a very serious learning outcome, and no child leaves our lab feeling like they did not learn how to learn. And which that excites me. I'm all about growing the brains in the industry, and people to think, but it's really about empowering their educators to step back and see, okay, who is learning in which way? What barriers do I have to remove from learning to get my students past a certain point to be able to be a capable, cooperative, collaborative member of a team making cooperative decisions? And that's what our workforce needs, right? Someone who can come in as a team member, know their job, but also be able to collaborate and cooperate in the decisions for an output, right? So then we move those students from our elementary programs right into middle school programs on the next level up. And then we come in from workforce perspective. We always bring subject matter experts in. This summer, it's medical in space. And so whereas students are designing humans on a chip, how, if we're not ready to send the whole person into space, how can we study DNA, on a chip that's been in space and back, and it's out there. So, we're introducing these educators and the students to the technology in the workforce so that they can get their hands on it and start to learn how to solve problems using tools, whether it's their pencil, which we emphasize as a tool, and then writing code into a mixed reality system. So there's a lot of that going on as we get them through that middle school program. And this is the important thing I hope everybody is hearing. They are not coming for a one-time engagement, spark their excitement. I pull them in for 25-hour curriculums because now they're owning. So who am I as a learner, right? Do I have barriers? How do I break those barriers down? Who do I get help from? And so just by spending that 25 hours learning a little bit about that from a workforce perspective, it's exciting to see how fast they can accelerate, to really functioning in a team with creative thought and excited about what they're producing. So an example of a summer program of students problem solving drones. So I started out as an environmental scientist in Florida, but Florida was not very environmentally science friendly. So I was, existentially in a crisis, like, what do I do? So I started teaching science. I had done all the field trips at our Museum of Minerals, and I just got excited about it. And so that, for that point in time, filled that niche. But as I left that, I'm still an environmental scientist at heart. So I gave all these kids drones. And I said, all right, we have a bee problem. We're not getting enough pollination. You've got to create drones that blow bubbles to simulate a pollination mechanism. You have to record time, pollination, pollen simulated release. And so they built drones, they made sure they worked, they flew them, and then they redesigned them to blow bubbles, for a very serious point. And these are 6th through 8th grade. So these are 11 through maybe 13-year-olds that are able to do this problem solve and tell you why.
And Lindsay, yeah, let me come in here because I love what you're doing. I think it's so creative and imaginative, but we have questions. We want to throw some questions at you. And one thing that I was impressed that you're doing, and you've sort of already talked about it, and I don't know if the audience caught it, but you are creating all of this for everyone. Meaning students with disabilities are also people that neurodiverse, like some of us on this call. And so just for our audience, because not only will they love what you're doing, Lindsay, but I just think I want to make sure they understand you're talking about all of us here.
Yes.
So
our doors are open.
And you use this word not for arts a lot, accessibility. And so I want to make sure that as we're talking about, I know Antonio has a question too, but I want to make sure that as we're talking about all this brilliance, you understand she's including us, she's including our community, because often we're not. Now, I also want to say, Lindsay, I was just talking to an educator not very long ago that their job, this company's job, was to find jobs for people like my daughter with intellectual disabilities or cognitive disabilities, since she has Down syndrome. And I talked to her about what jobs they were finding, and she said dishwashers, clerks in the grocery stores, and woodworkers. I didn't know, really? Do we have a serious shortage of woodworkers. And so I thought, where in the world is Lindsay in this conversation? So I just wanted to selfishly make sure that everybody knew what Lindsay's talking about. She's talking about us. And so I want to send that to you. And then I know Antonio has a question for you too, but I'll let you go next.
Yes, thank you, Deborah. And you guys stop me anytime because I can talk a lot. But and that is a challenge in our industry, right? Because especially on the younger student level, because there's some behavioral challenges. And so there are a lot of well-meaning adults out there who run informal programs, but as soon as a participant cannot function within their set structure, they're no longer welcome into that learning environment. And so as I witnessed this, even as I've shared my lab with some colleagues, from different workforce areas, we've had long discussions on this. So for me, it was very important to have a learning environment that could welcome any learner, any age. I started my story with the younger kids, but I didn't get to the adults yet. So any age, any learner, we can adjust. So our lab is completely fluid, dynamic learning space that can be adjusted to meet the needs or the wants, of any learner that comes in there, whether it is smart boards that lower, turn to tabletops, so that, maybe a student in a wheelchair can then be equally accessible, and before we got some of those tools, we just, moved our furniture around. We offer softies, sound, can really be a challenge for a lot of people, and it can overstimulate fast, especially in lab and conference environments where you got high bay ceilings, you've got stuff hanging, so we make sure that if we don't have a tool accessible to a learner who might need that tool, we make sure we have it next time, or we offer them to always bring in a tool. But you're right, Deborah. I've worked with discoverability on our side of the town, and they're working with me to make sure that we are not putting people in a workforce that is not a highly needed workforce. And I was just laughing because I was just reading through our aeronautics, and I'm working on standards across the board of what careers are in the highest demand right now. And this will have to be our next conversation because this list is too new to me. And I'm going through it, breaking it down from high school all the way through to a 4-year, and really breaking down from aerospace, aviation to construction, to energy, electricity. And so, especially with this digital twin concept that the world is grabbing a hold of, there are a lot of opportunities for 3D scanning. You no longer have to sit there and be a 3D modeler and get, those details. You can now take an iPhone, an iPad, and employ LiDAR scanning or photogrammetry. And that is something, that I don't think we're talking about some of these jobs that are going to be highly needed. Those can go right into an immersive world, but on a more practical level, how are we evaluating our infrastructure as it ages, right? And so with some of the robotics that anybody can participate with a LiDAR scanner, you're now able to, get good feedback data, from underneath bridges, infrastructure. So there's a lot of career opportunity with tools that everybody in our community, no matter who you are, what your learning challenge is, what your bank account is, right? All of those matter, but there are tools out there that I try very hard to get into the community's hands and get them to start thinking about ways to use those as careers.
So lots of fascinating stuff you're doing.
We love it.
We'll jump back a little bit because you talked about overstimulation, and we're definitely something I'm very much aware of. In fact, we did a piece with the collaborative piece with the BBC and the University of the Bioengineering Institute of Barcelona in Catalonia in Barcelona a few years back, where we were using immersion to teach people, neurotypical people, what it's like to be neurodivergent and have those overstimulations. So very simple simulatory environment of a classroom, but with amplified noises and lights and just distractions all around you, and then trying to test people at the end of it, see what they'd absorbed, and you were able to create a feedback loop to amplify that and look at things like galvanic skin response to be able to ramp up the level of distractions based upon someone's stress levels and so on. So I think it's really interesting that you're looking at the distraction, because there is some fantastic benefit from being able to have that sort of hands-on learning, even if it's virtual hands-on, virtual things, in the world of digital twins. But there's also there are definitely challenges with VR in terms of accessibility in itself. So I'd be interested to look at that. But maybe Antonio's also got some comments on and questions on digital twins, because I know this is an area he's passionate on too.
Was there a question in there, Neil?
Yes, sorry. Yeah. So what are you doing
as far as that?
Yeah, well, not just in terms of overstimulation, but how do you take into account the overstimulation that you might have in a VR environment, and how do you also account in VR for different impairment groups, because obviously they're going to require the information to be passed to them in different ways. Are you using haptics? Are you using sort of 3D audio? What are the things that you're using to be able to?
So a little bit of all of that, but to be honest, we're really kind of in the earlier breaches of inclusivity with VR, because VR, like you said, on its own. So not everybody can be in a VR headset, right, for more than a minute. So right there is a situation, right? So with the younger kids, even the older kids, I actually will pair them up in VR. And so there'll be one in VR, and then I'll have another on an iPad Comcasting. So there's actually two people in that world, whether they realize that or not. And so then there's always a guide, right? So that person with the laptop or the iPad that is seeing, the person in the VR, what they're doing is kind of that guide. And if you get overstimulated, you need a break, you take it out. And of course, that's for our visual, learners. But you're right, there are different sounds, and we're working on how do we really, especially with the visually impaired learner, make VR accessible. And I don't think we are there, honestly. And so that's why I think that AR, as far as, a truly learning tool, is probably going to be a more accessible tool for everyone, because there's a lot of ability, right, to manipulate in augmented reality, the sound, the visual, the tactile, with the haptic suits and gloves. The cost is still so high on that market that it's really not, it's more of a experimental use for us in the lab rather than, a best practice at the moment, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of behavioral challenges still in our young American kids, I see, in VR that we're going to have to work through, because I use an animal care VR for them. And we have robotic dogs. And so I've got little fluffy golden retriever robotic dogs that we teach sequencing, basics of programming. And then I can put them into VR. And it's really interesting to watch the change in behavior when they don't think that it's real. So we are still looking at how do we help the younger learners to make sure that their behaviors are appropriate in a learning environment, especially now as we have multiple player opportunities in VR, and they are actually interacting together. So I still think there's a lot of, practice we have to build for good practice in VR with kids. But the research is showing, for the learner that has attention challenges, that might be on the spectrum, there is learning gains in VR, but it's still, like I said, not in that good best practice place yet. Still that experimental, who does it work for? Does that really kind of answer what you're thinking, Neil?
Yeah, great. Great answer. Antonio, do you want to come in?
Well, so many things happen, in this conversation. So I need to find a way, where to start. So, Lindsay, so I'm sure, in your work, you came across a lot of different scenarios, a lot of different experiences when people have to program, when people have to, work with the drones. No, this human machine collaboration is something, real new. Okay, um, how how do you see it uh, going forward, in order to maximize the use of the technology, and also to somehow remove some fears that we as humans might have in relation to, uh, using the machines, or like you were saying before, how we can somehow work in our bias, when, let's say, in the case of a robot that looks like a dog, how can we work on the behaviors of the younger people when that they understand the context? Okay, this is a machine, this is not a real dog. How do you work in that element?
Well, we're still working on that element, and the more exposure I think is so important, right? Because not only do we bring in the fluffy dogs, but then our researchers, I don't know how familiar you are with, excuse me, the Boston Dynamic dogs. So they're the
Mm.
robotic dogs without the head. So we have one on campus that comes to visit my lab often. We've
Wow.
affectionately named this Boston Dynamic dog tape measure because tape measure is literally being taught to use LiDAR scanner. But not
Wow.
only that, we are actually experimenting with the students that are manipulating tape measure from a distance. They don't even know tape measure is real. They're in a virtual world with tape measure. But we actually have built, and this I have to give credit to Joe Kiter and the Sensible Lab at UCF, built a replication of the virtual world, small scale, that the students are manipulating the robot with. And then when they find out that they were truly interacting and the robot was really doing everything they were doing in the simulated environment, it just completely changes their mindset on how they are now working with the machine. But I am super excited about machine learning and AI, especially for our neurodiverse population, because that exactly, I think, Antonio, you hit the mark, and I think it will allow us to reduce fear. If I'm a student who struggles with verbal communication, and for me to be on this, group to talk to you would be horrific. I'm not that person by any means, but I work with those people. So if I had, an AI, maybe Lindsay, on the other side, I'm talking to myself, or, someone who I really admire, AI on the other side that I can practice my communication with in private, maybe. I mean, how powerful is that? If I jump into a serious game, with a character that maybe is driven with AI, and here in America, we've got a cultural challenge around mathematics. The way we speak it, the way we practice it, the way we apply it. And so this is something I'm excited about on the machine learning aspect, because I feel like, and this is a future idea for me, but we could put kids into a serious game situation that has them breaking down challenges based on skills. And as soon as they get stuck, right, they start to, I can't do that math, or I can't figure out that measurement. Our AI jumps in, right, and says, wait, we can. Let's think about it from this perspective. So now we're breaking down that barrier of fear, and that student is able to guide around that. Then they're excited, they jump back out, and they teach their parents. And I witnessed, not on that level, but I have spent my past summer with Florida virtual school students. So these are students who are completely taught at home, virtually, and don't have a lab to come into. So I've been working to get them out of the cyberspace, right, and into a real lab for workforce development, because they can't be what they don't see, right? If you don't know it's there, you can't be it. So I first had to really help the parents understand the need for them to be able to come into an inclusive learning environment where everybody was welcome, the importance of them learning about workforce development tools, and they're going to be different when they're in the workforce, but they've got an idea of where they're going. What is workforce talking about? What are we doing? So once I could break that barrier with the parents and pull those kids in, those students spent a week with me, and by the middle of that week they owned my learning space and brought their families in and put them in VR headsets, got them into my augmented reality sandbox, got them into the medical AR, and they were teaching their parents. So in less than a week I turned learners who had no concept of modeling, simulation, and training, a lot of the tools that I put them in, um, and they became the instructors because we reduced all barriers, and they were quite diverse learners. They came from all different learning backgrounds. Some of them learned on a phone in the middle of their bed. Some of them had full classrooms. So it was a really interesting way to pull everybody in and show the power of workforce development in the hands of younger learners.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah. So I just have so many questions, so I'm going to try to focus just to make sure that I don't create. So considering all those experiences, and also considering that today, when companies need people, need talent, but not everyone needs to have a university degree to face the needs of the workforce. How do you see the impact of the work that you're doing at your lab to improve workforce training in skills that some people don't have, and that was put them out of a job? But how can you use these technologies to open opportunities for jobs that are out there that companies need, and try to match with people who are looking for jobs, who don't have the skills but can use this technology to upskill themselves and to fill in the gap?
So that's a great question, because I think that is one of my current largest challenges. So I am working across the nation with and now I'm excited to join the global. I've actually had some Welsh teachers recently come visit the lab, and I think I'm getting some Welsh students in March. But in America, I don't know, the past decade really, thought everybody needs to go to college. I started as an associate's in science track in environmental engineering technology, and I've never left that. So I am working really hard. I pull in our CTE instructors. So career technology education instructors are what we call them in the US. And so I make sure annually I have a large population that we do a training on. Here are the skills I am learning from workforce. So I spend hours of my life visiting all the different workforce groups, whether it's aerospace, it's medical, it's gaming. So I spend a lot of hours with the directors, the human resource people hiring. What is it? And then I try to get those back to the CTE educators who are going to do a better job at reaching more students. But that's not enough, because we have a lot of neighborhoods. And I am a community builder. And so I am working really hard now to identify communities who kind of got left behind or overshadowed, especially in the Florida space race, and actually bringing some of these tools into their community and sharing with them, here's where you can go. So not too far from you is the Florida Solar Energy Center. You can go and become, a solar energy auditor. And this is how. So we're going straight out into the community, trying to educate not just the kids, but the families, right? And then we have to do it in multiple languages. Mm-hmm. And so, it's small at this point. I'm just really starting, because it took me a while to get those, early learning, middle learning, and university. But now I have 4 employees that are running those programs. And I have full focus right now on, we don't need university students everywhere. We need technologists who can come and fix things right now. And so that's part of that whole LiDAR scanning. That is, a very 2-day right now skill that's very fast to learn. You don't stand in front of the light scanner. It's almost it's not that simple, but that's a start. And again, with the solar energy auditing, that's a start.
And you've got a LiDAR in one of these as well.
If you've got an iPhone Pro 11 or up, you have a LiDAR scanner.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, wow.
iPad phone. Yeah. If you're
I
an
didn't
Android
realize
user
that.
like myself, you have photogrammetry.
Well,
Yeah,
I
exactly.
love that you're teaching the future skills. That's what we need. I'm sorry, Neil, to interrupt, but we really appreciate that, Lindsay. I'm sorry, Neil.
Never been known to happen before.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
So, Lindsay, thank you. I mean, what you're doing is fascinating and very much aligned with, some of the things that we think are important. So I agree with you that we don't always need graduates, says the guy with 2 degrees that are not necessarily related to the job that I do, right? So, in the UK, my team did a lot of work on apprenticeships where we take school leavers and give them relevant skills. So again, as businesses, we need people with the skills that can do the jobs that we need to do for our clients. And we really want to make sure that people with disabilities and diverse populations can acquire those skills so they can be qualified candidates, because part of the systemic problem that we face around the globe is that people with disabilities get taught the wrong skills. Right? So they get taught completely the wrong skills. So they then actually, it's not that companies don't want to employ people with disabilities, but they need to be able to do the jobs that the companies need them to do. And the organizations that have traditionally supported people with disabilities are teaching them the wrong skills. And to quote Susan Scott Parker twice in 2 weeks, they're teaching them to be piano tuners and basket weavers, and those are not what today's industry needs. So, today's industry needs, people that can build digital twins, people that learn prompting, that can be able to have a conversation with AI, that aren't afraid of robot dogs with no heads. I'm afraid I fail on that last one because I find that the Boston Dynamics robot's quite creepy, especially when they're opening doors and so on.
Yeah, they scare me too.
Yeah, but we need.
I saw too many
those,
movies.
Yeah, we need those future skills. So thank you for teaching the future skills. I also need to thank our sponsors and supporters, Amazon and MyClearText, for keeping us on air and keeping us captions there. And I really look forward to continuing the conversation on social media. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.